I think there's a risk with inclusion discussions that they're quite broad and inclusive. But I think there needs to be a way of drilling down to some specifics. And one of the things I've sort of learned from having moved from Hertfordshire to Hull is the change in geographic area. And that focus now running a city hub does give quite a lot of clarity to the purpose behind our inclusion strategy. And I think the first thing, whether we're talking about comms or whether we're talking about even how to devise an inclusion strategy within our business plan, is to understand where we are focusing and why. We know in Hull that there is a general challenge, an issue to do with engagement opportunity, which has been magnified by COVID. We have a substantial digital deficit. We have a significant number of children living in poverty. We have a lot of marginalised communities. But within that, we have places that are far more challenging than others. So it would be inconceivable, for example, for us to do an inclusion strategy that didn't mention specifically the challenges around East Hull, which is where there are some greater challenges. And I think part of it is to drill down to communities, schools, wards even. And that is a way of linking the priority to corporate plans and plans within local authority areas. Whether you as a service are in a local authority area or not, that plan should be a steer as to where the concerns within that local authority are. So when I was in Hertfordshire, for example, one of the early areas that we were constantly challenged on was with South Oxley, because it had higher rates of unemployment. There was disengagement from schools. There weren't many community opportunities because of the way it was geographically laid out. And it meant that if you spoke to councillors about, oh, well, we're doing some work in South Oxley, they would nod earnestly and say, oh, yes, that's very important, because it was something registering on their documentation as well. So I think look at the profile, because you've got to make some choices. I mean, yes, you need the broad brushstroke of saying there is an equality and diversity commitment to any marginalised group within your patch, but then under that headline there have to be some choices made. So I would say that one of the things that we need to understand for September is, in this plethora of reasons and ways that we need to readdress what we're doing, we need to make some decisions about where this effort is going to be. So from a MusicNet East point of view, we've used some of our funding to match fund some time within PRUs that we haven't worked in before. So if they buy an hour, they get an hour free. So we end up with a block of 2 hours in each of the PRUs, and that becomes a target for our work. We'll be also looking, as I said, at some areas within East Hull of particularly high deprivation. And also there is an area called the Beverley Road corridor, which is where there are a lot of migrant families are placed, often temporarily, on their way to being housed elsewhere in the country. So I think it needs some focus, because if it's not focused on we are doing this there, then it becomes quite nebulous for schools to understand what they're doing. And I think if they understand that they're involved in a programme on their patch and there is a link between the work that you are doing and the community that that school is serving, then I think it gives some much stronger clarity to it. The second point is about why a school would buy in. And I think it's worth looking at alternative provision and the way that alternative provision is structured within your area. It might be possible for a music service or music provider to create a provision that could be formally identified as an AP provision. It would have to have some pretty clear educational outcomes, but schools have budget for AP. We've had a couple of primary schools this year whose SLAs have increased significantly because they want to do more work, and they don't want to send these children to the AP providers that they have historically sent them. They want to change, they want to do something musical, and therefore we're being commissioned to do some work as alternative provision within that school setting. So again, it's a sort of similar point about being clear, but when you talk to a school, what are you actually saying to them? Are you saying, we'd like to work with you on inclusion? Or are you saying, for example, we have some provision that we believe would be of interest to you as alternative provision for some of your more challenging young people or children? So you use the language of schools and the agendas of schools to make the inclusion strategy as relevant as possible to them. The third thing is about communication in general. Communication strategy, promotion and whatever, I think it needs to be a multi-strand approach. We're using a lot more social media. Yes, we are emailing schools, we're writing to them, but it's a hard slog. And it basically boils down to doing lots of phone calls and trying to chase people up and get them on board and get them engaged. And that, irrespective of how exciting the project, irrespective of how much funding you've got, that is just a merciless task that you have to block off some time or one of your team to do, and there's no getting away from it. If you send something out and hope that you'll get enough people replying to do it, it's not going to happen. So almost a belligerent sales force commitment to sell what you are doing, particularly at this time when schools have the added excuse of being very busy with COVID, I think needs thinking about. And then finally, from me, and I'll sort of hand over and see if any of those things trigger any sort of discussion. It is this thing about workforce. I don't believe that inclusion should be I've said this lots of times, should be some kind of compensatory provision for people that don't do what we do for everybody else. We need to fundamentally change our core provision so that people can be included in it. And it's no good us saying, well, actually, we'll run this thing over here and we'll try and encourage teachers to come over to this side of the operation and turn them away from the work that they value so much. And we have to rethink. And I think we have to take advantage of this COVID period. Let's turn some of this really, really negative stuff into a positive. At the moment, we can't deliver any of our bands or ensembles as they stand. So we're looking at completely restructuring, or having to completely restructure the timetable, ensemble size, gaps between each ensemble, etc., etc. It is the perfect time to look at renaming, rebranding, refocusing, reprioritizing what out of school music making looks like. And that's not saying that it has to be at the detriment of traditional music making. But if we genuinely believe in inclusion, then we have to demonstrate with the activities that we have control over that we are genuinely prioritizing it as an organization. And if we don't demonstrate that our services and ensembles and centers are truly open, and not just open in the old sense of, well, anybody could join if they wanted to, but truly open and inclusive, then we're missing a trick. So that was that's where I am. So all those things kind of get drawn together. And on a very practical level, I think also don't go too early with the comms in September, because I think schools are going to have a nightmare. So I'm inclined to look at starting things in week 3 or 4. But that's just a really boring practical thing, because I think if we start too early, it'll get lost. So I don't know whether, I can't see anybody either. So I don't know if anybody wants to chip in and challenge, hurl something back at me, start a conversation. But yeah, can I just add one thing? And that's about for our funders, the Arts Council, not so much youth music, obviously, because they have a different focus. But there's too much of what we do which requires evidence of impact on big numbers. And actually, one of the things of inclusion is that what we need big impact on small numbers. So if you can profoundly change the musical lives of a small group of young people from disadvantaged groups, that will have a profound effect on them, and also it will lead to that work being able to be more replicable. If we attempt an inclusion push, if you like, based on look how many people we've got involved in inclusion, we are also setting ourselves up to fail, because this work is hard. They're not engaging for a reason. And also the quality of experience that they need in order to win them over cannot be achieved in a symbolic taster session. This is hard, sustained work. So we need big impact on small numbers. I think that schools have a perception of what we can and can't do, which I think this type of work helps break that mold. We're doing some work in a primary school where they have had 5 year 6 boys who are causing a huge amount of disruption, a huge number of challenges. We were resolving a problem for the school. And I think school is a good place to start. Yes, there are communities that we could identify, and they're absolutely valid. And we've done traveller stuff in the past as well, which is really, really challenging. But in a sense, every single school has a cohort of children for whom they are concerned for a variety of reasons. And I think if you can get linked in with a school and identifying whether it's about keeping those children in school, whether they have well-being issues, whether there are physical impairments to how they are actually able to engage in music, whatever it is, each school will have a group of children that they are concerned about, and music services need to be seen as somewhere where a school can turn for an alternative response for those young people, and I think that's a good starting point.
Yeah, thanks, James. I was going to make a similar sort of point that these children are at risk of exclusion in all schools, and but also this work can be done by mainstream instrumental tutors. It doesn't just have to be your inclusion tutor that you bring in to do the work. When we first started doing training in Hertfordshire, we brought lots of our broader workforce together and got them to sort of talk about personal and social outcomes and what they most valued in their own practice, what they thought they were really doing for the children. And most of the tutors identified personal and social outcomes as the key element of their work that they really valued, that they could see how the more privileged children were getting through grades and doing well through that. But a lot of them also valued how the children that weren't so successful were still getting a lot out of just the actual relationship with them, which is the one-to-one relationship often in a school is really, really valuable and is a key outcome for the people in the peri, but it is often not on the radar for the music service, but it will be on the radar for the school. So simply opening up these conversations, creating a space where people will talk about personal and social outcomes and talk about, we train them also by talking about how they learn themselves and what they valued in their relationships with their tutors. And it was always the personal social relationship as around the music making, not the technical progress, which we always seem to think we get valued by. But the real key enabler to that, I wanted to pick up again, is having inclusion champions. And I don't just mean within the workforce, I mean within the schools, where we've done work that's gone really well. There's been someone in the school who's absolutely got it, whether it's the head of music, and if you can, head of music will, obviously absolutely key to this. But if there's a Senko that really gets it, it will absolutely take off because they really get the different kind of outcomes coming out that they're looking for. And often they've come forward with funding. We are now getting approaches from people who work in ESCs trying to prevent children falling out of school to say, can you do this? And we say, yeah, actually we can do this. And they say, well, can you find someone to do it? And we say, yeah, well, we've got someone in the school already. It's the drum tutor. And they can do it. And they get into it. And invariably, if we support them and explain what we're looking for, it will go well because the tutors can already do it. We are getting calls from schools now for September saying, we've heard about this nurture group stuff. We recognise we will need to be looking at this in September. Can you bring in a tutor to do this? So as James said, schools are really looking for this in September.